Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 148 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Jessica Correnti for this episode. And Jessica is a child life specialist, and she's the founder of a practice called Kids Grief Support. She is also the author of 2 picture books for young grievers, and her newest book, which is called The ABCs of Grief, will be available in February 2024. And in this discussion, we dove deep on a number of topics. We talked about the power of books and how they can help kids see that they're not the only kid with a parent who's died. We talked about the importance of being honest with kids, and Jessica gave us some examples of clear language to help kids understand what it means when someone dies. She talked about what she looks for in developmentally appropriate grief books for kids and so many more things. And so much of our focus at the Widowed Parent Institute is on helping parents learn about children's grief and how to support our own grieving kids. And so today's guest had so much to share with us on this topic. Be sure to follow Jessica on Instagram too, because she shares lots of tips and resources about children's grief over there. So before we jump into my discussion with Jessica, I wanted to let you guys know some news from here. My next book, Widowed Parents Unite, is available now. And actually, I want to read you the whole title, including the subtitle. It's called Widowed Parents Unite, 52 Tips to Get Through the First Year from One Widowed Parent to Another. And it's very different than my first book, which was a memoir. And with this book, I intentionally brought in 48 different voices, because I wanted to reflect the experiences of a wide variety of widowed moms and dads with different ages of kids and different circumstances and different locations, including some who are outside the United States. And I got the best email the other day, so I wanted to share it with you. It was from someone who is not a widowed parent herself, but she heard about the book and she bought it as a gift for her neighbor. And this neighbor's wife had died recently, leaving him with 2 teenagers. And this person who wrote to me doesn't really know the neighbor very well, but she bought him the book as a gift and she dropped it on his porch around the time the book came out. And the other day she ran into him while dog walking, and this is like probably 2 months after she had dropped it on his porch. And so here's part of her email to me. She said, "Tom rolled down his window, looked at me, and said, quote, 'Are you the one that gave me that book?' He seemed close to tears. I said, 'Yes.' He said, 'Thank you. It's the only book that's helping me right now. I pick it up when I need to, and I read a couple chapters, and it makes me feel better.'" So this is exactly what I wanted to do with this book, and it's exactly why I'm so grateful that the 48 contributing authors wrote such thoughtful pieces. I mean, this type of reader feedback was exactly what I was hoping for. When he said, "I pick it up and when I need to, and I read a couple chapters, and it makes me feel better." I mean, if you asked me to script something like for somebody to say, I couldn't have said it any better. I wanted to have the kind of book that you could pick it up, read a little, put it back down. You don't have to focus on a whole book length piece of reading. And so if you haven't picked up a copy of Widowed Parents Unite yet, I encourage you to check it out. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you like to buy your books. Okay, that's all the news from here. Let's get on with the show. Support for this podcast comes from BetterHelp. You can talk with a licensed professional therapist online, anytime, anywhere. Visit betterhelp.com/widowedparent to learn more and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/widowedparent. I hope you'll check it out. My guest today is Jessica Correnti. Jessica is a certified child life specialist and the owner of a private practice called Kids Grief Support. She is also the author of 2 children's books on grief, Forever Connected, and also the Spanish language edition of the same book, and her brand new book, The ABCs of Grief, which will be available very soon. She's joining us today from Baltimore, Maryland. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jenny. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to talking with you. Because, okay, your practice is called Kids Grief Support, and yes, that's amazing. And that is so much of what we focus on learning about here at the Widowed Parent Podcast and the Widowed Parent Institute. Like, how can we support kids who are grieving and support their parents in supporting their grieving children? And that sounds like a mouthful, but it's not, as I'm sure you know, right, intuitively obvious. You're a child life specialist, and I want to get into that. But most people, when their partner and the kid's other parent dies, and they have some kids, some teenagers, most of those surviving parents are not child life specialists or psychologists or experts in child development or anything like that. And it can be pretty hard to know, what to do. All of a sudden, it's like it's a whole new deal with now grieving kids instead of kids with regular kid issues.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a whole ball of just a tangled ball of yarn, really, because not only is there this deep, raw grief as a spouse or partner, you have your own grief to navigate through, and you also have your child's grief to navigate through, and it all gets tangled up together. And as a parent, you want what's best for your child. You want to help them through things, and it can feel difficult to know exactly how to do that when you're in survival mode and you're just trying to do, one foot in front of the other to make sure that you're getting out of bed and you're making meals and like your most simple steps to just get through the day. So it's a lot to navigate, and that's why my practice and so many other supports are out there to make sure that widowed parents are not alone in this. Nobody should ever have to try and navigate this experience on their own. And so there's definitely been a missing piece, at least in my community and in many communities, where there have not seemed to be many supports outside of the hospital setting. And that's where I started my career, in the hospital setting. And I wanted to make sure that families had a resource and a place to go to, because, if you're in the hospital setting, which some families never are,
Right.
If you're in the hospital setting, that's not where the processing and the bulk of the grieving and healing takes place. It takes place at home.
Sure, over an extended amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think you summarized it really well, like some of the key issues and worries. And I know for me, one of the biggest concerns immediately was like, okay, so my kid's dad, my husband, died when they were 9 and 11. How is this not going to completely destroy them and their lives, right? And I think a lot of widowed parents have that same fear and worry and wonder, and you want to try to figure out, all right, now I'm the surviving parent. I'm the only parent who's here parenting them. So now what do I do? So let's get into this a little bit. And I want to understand, because I'd never heard the word child life specialist until a few years ago, when I started getting involved in this work, and I met someone who was a child life specialist. I'm like, what's that? What's that? Right? Like, this sounds interesting. So I read on your website, and then I want you to tell us kind of what this means. On your website, it says child life interventions utilize an in-depth knowledge of child development, the impact of stressful life events, therapeutic play, education, and collaboration with the child support system to aid in optimal coping. So that's interesting. That's a mouthful. There's a lot in there. Can you tell us, like, what is a child life specialist, or what does this field and practitioners do?
Sure. So there are so many different hats that a child life specialist wears.
Okay.
I feel like anybody who is a child life specialist has like their elevator pitch of like what this actually is, because there are so many pieces that come together to make a child life specialist what they are. And as a support, there are many different things that we're doing depending on the situation. A great one-liner is, we are child development experts that help children and families navigate through difficult life events. That can be a lot of different things. So traditionally speaking, at one point, there was pretty much only one place you could find a child life specialist. Decades ago, that was a hospital setting. It has evolved quite a bit over the last decade or two, and now child life specialists are found in a lot of community-based settings. So some are in private practice, some are in hospice and palliative care. Some child life specialists are just in grief or bereavement centers. Some child life specialists are in dental practices or in the court system. So really any type of area where a child may be going through a really difficult event, whether it's a medical-based experience or a big life grief transition, that's where we can be found.
Gotcha.
Because we use our background knowledge in child development and play and help kids understand what is happening, process the experience, utilize play and other therapeutic interventions to help them understand what's going on, give them a way to express their experience in a way that is healing for them, a way that helps them process, because kids process through play. And a huge piece of who we are and what we help kids do as child life specialists is give kids tools to manage those difficult experiences. So help them learn the coping techniques to move through whatever difficult experience or life-altering situation that they're going through. And something that a lot of children and families find is that, you know, when they have these tools to get through these really difficult experiences, then they'll be able to carry those on and use those tools in other difficult life experiences, because you know, life is full of all kinds of difficult experiences. It's not just like, unfortunately, it's not just like we all just get our like one, this is your one really difficult experience that you're going to have and you have a free pass for the rest of your life.
Wouldn't that be
lovely?
Nice?
Yeah. But that's not how life is. We all have really tough things that we go through. And if kids have the ability to work through those things and have coping skills early on, then they can move through difficult life experiences with a little bit more ease as they get older and go through other difficult life events. Which I know one of the things that you mentioned is one of these common concerns that a widowed parent has is this comes to me all the time, where a parent's like, the other parent died. This is going to screw them up forever. That's like their biggest worry.
Right.
And yes, it's going to change them forever. Absolutely. But just because this awful, awful experience happened does not mean that they are traumatized for life. They are changed forever. Absolutely. But it does not mean that, you know, everything is going to be terrible for the rest of their life. There might be some things that come out of this for the better. And it's not that like silver lining BS. That's not what I'm trying to create there. It's going through this experience and working through the tough stuff. They might develop skills that they can carry on that are just these amazing strengths and skills that they can take with them in the future. I know I just said a lot of things, a lot of different layers. So hopefully that's all making sense to everybody listening. But
yeah, thank you for taking us through that. And I think in your case, so you mentioned all the child life specialists can be in all these different settings, and you come out of a hospital background. Now you're focused primarily or entirely on children, you know, in the grief space, and within that on supporting grieving children.
Yes. So now I spent, 14 years in the hospital, and about 5 of those years were in pediatric intensive care units. So I've certainly had my fair share of grief and trauma and all kinds of situations happening in the ICU. But for the last 2 years in my private practice, I've solely focused on supporting grieving children. And most of my clients that I see are seeing me after the death of a family member, typically either a parent or a sibling. Sometimes it's a grandparent or another significant family member to them. And then I also see children who are grieving with other types of losses as well. So non-death losses. So it might be, they've gone through a big move that has really kind of shook their their world, or a divorce, or a bunch of medical situations that have created, a really tough situation for them to move through. So lots of different grief scenarios. And unfortunately, sometimes kids have a couple of those things happening all at once, and
Sure.
really compounds their process to
Sure. Well, that
cope
gets into
with
all those,
everything.
secondary losses. I mean,
Mhm.
if one parent dies, for example, that might kind of have a cascading effect on the family's financial situation and where they
Yeah.
live, and therefore where they go to school, and therefore what neighborhood and community and friend group. And like a lot of things could
Yeah.
potentially change, starting with a major loss like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of my clients that I have that have had a parent die, those kids also went through a move. Their financial situation is drastically different. Their relationship with the extended family members of the parent who died is totally different. So there are so many secondary
Mm-hmm.
layers right there, and it's not just one loss. It
Right.
is multi-layered and really evolving as time goes on too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As I'm sure my listeners have figured out by now, if they've been widowed very long, there's a lot of different layers and aspects to all this. But it's good to hear you explain this. So let me ask something, because I'm trying to imagine, like if I was going to get support, for example, for myself as an adult, or maybe an 18-year-old or something, college student, whatever.
Mhm.
You're probably going to go to a therapist and you're going to talk, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so now you're telling me you support 4-year-olds and 10-year-olds. Do the 4-year-olds show up and talk, or like what does that look like? How do you work with a young child?
That's a great question, because kids do not process in the same way as adults. I do not expect a young child to, show up, sit on a couch, and talk to me about everything that's going on. That's not how
Okay.
it works.
All right. Okay.
So I see kids starting at. I have some kids that I've seen that are like an older 2-year-old, and
Hmm.
of course, a 2-year-old is not going to sit there and say, "I'm feeling sad,"
Let me tell
because
you my life story. Right.
yeah, it doesn't
Uh-huh.
work that way.
Hmm.
So, all of my interactions with supporting grieving children, they revolve around play.
Mm.
So I work with kids both virtually all over the country as well as in person. And both virtual and in person have a very similar structure. So often the very beginning of my sessions, and these sessions are anywhere from like 45 to 60 minutes, which sometimes I think people are like, wow, how do you keep kids entertained that long and engaged for that
Especially
long?
on Zoom or something.
Yeah, yeah. But it's definitely possible. So these sessions, they start with a fun icebreaker. So it might be playing a game. Um, if it's in person, playing a board game, playing a card game, really getting to know them. And same can be done virtually, just in a little bit, tweaking some things a little bit. But we do a lot of expressive art activities.
Hmm.
I've played a whole bunch of games that are traditional games, like let's say playing Uno or Jenga, but then it has a therapeutic twist to it, where
Ah,
maybe
tell me
each
about that.
time, yeah. So for example, maybe it's Jenga, and
Okay.
each Jenga piece has a color on it, and each color is associated with something on a sheet of paper, or perhaps even a card that's color coded. And they pick up a card each time they pick one of the blocks out. And some of those cards might be more of a getting to know you type of question to really build that trust and rapport. And others might be a little bit more like therapeutic based with, tell me a favorite memory of your dad, or tell me a time when you were feeling sad about something at home, or things that will really get into a little deeper layer of what might be going on in their mind. But there are a lot of different tools that can be used. So games are huge, art is huge. I, obviously love books. I know you said in my intro that I've written a few children's books, and that is a huge piece of my interactions with kids. I have a huge library that I pull from with books that will help kids feel seen and validated in their experience. There are a ton of wonderful books, and even, books that are specific to the death of a parent. There are a ton of books out there that are really helpful to just, let kids know that they are not alone in this. There are other kids that have been through similar situations and experiences and losses, and books can be a lot, they can be so powerful. They really get to the heart of what these kids are going through. And there's just something so magical about a book where it's, it's hard to totally even articulate with a children's book. It's just, they feel so seen in the moment. I mean, there are so many times where I've been reading a book and a child stops me and they're like, wait, there's other kids out there like me that like somebody else has had a parent die too. Wait, what? So, because for so many of these kids, they've never met anybody else that has been through something like this.
That is such an important point. And I don't think I fully appreciated the weight of that point early on in my whole experience with this. Like, but I hear all the time from listeners and readers, like, their kids feel like they're the only weird kid with a dead dad in their neighborhood or their school or their class, right? And, I'm not saying they're weird. I'm saying that they're perceived as weird, sometimes, but because they stand out in that different way. Their dad or their mom is dead, right? And that's weird. If you're a certain age and like, you're trying to not stand out like that.
Yeah, they don't want to be different.
Right? Exactly. And they maybe they think they're the only one. And that's one reason why I know you and I are both members of the National Alliance for Children's Grief, and the grief centers that, many are members as well. And in many communities, in fact, I'll put a link in the show notes to the lookup tool they have on their website where people can find centers, in their own community. One of the big benefits I hear from people all the time is when their kids go there once a week or once a month or something, and they're with a group of kids a similar age, and they're not the only kid with a dead mom or a dead dad. Now they're with a bunch of other kids in the same situation. And just, even if they're not talking about it, even if they're just, I don't know, doing art or a ropes course or something like that, knowing that these other kids have this similar experience is powerful in and of itself.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
It is very powerful. And there's like,
you mentioned the power of books to do the same
this
thing.
Instant bond.
Yeah. Right. And to be on some level with other kids who just kind of get it. And even if the experiences are different and someone had this type of loss and that type of loss and somebody was, different lengths of time ago, there's still kind of a fundamental, like, this person kind of gets it.
And when kids can connect with others that have been through the same type of loss, so a parent loss or the death of a brother or sister, having that same type of loss, there is just this like unspoken bond and connection, and it is just like so powerful watching that take place. I mean, I have a group of kids that come together every other week that this group is specific to kids who have gone through the death of a brother or sister. And these kids are so tight with each other. They were all strangers when they first came in there, and all it took was one time coming together, and it's their safe place where they can talk about their person, and it often doesn't feel safe for them to talk about their person in other places. I mean, I have clients that come to me and they say that I've one in mind right now that says that they don't talk about their parent who died in school because they don't want to feel different. They don't want to have people say the wrong thing. They don't want to have to explain themselves.
Right.
million times a day.
Yeah.
So, having groups and spaces and places where they can feel seen gives them permission to talk about their person, whether it's their mom, their dad, their brother, their sister, whoever that person is, in a totally unfiltered way. And unfortunately, there aren't that many safe spaces for these kids to talk, in an unfiltered way about their person and their grief.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned, and thank you for that, the notion of books and children's books in particular we're talking about now. And you mentioned this idea that, kids recognizing themselves in there and saying, wow, are there actually other kids who have lost a parent or lost a sibling? And the power of that. And I think that's really, what's the word I'm looking for? Powerful. I've used that word too many times in a row, but and so I wanted to explore a little bit this topic of books, and I want to talk about your own books in a minute here. But before we get to that, I noticed that you had I think it was somewhere on your website, some resources on what you look for in a good, because there are so many books, right? If you go to Amazon and you type in like kids grief books or something, you find all these things and you're like, well, how do I know which ones are good? How do I know which ones are going to be helpful, or, or even like, therapeutically appropriate, or I don't know if therapeutically is the right word, but, like developmentally appropriate and framing things the right way. And I want to put a link in the show notes. I think you have a specific list on Amazon where you've called out a bunch of ones you recommend. I'll put that in the show notes for people who want to look. But I wanted to ask you if you could just help us think a little bit about, like, what do you look for in a children's book? What makes it, good as opposed to not worth buying or reading? I mean, specifically for grieving kids, not all children's books everywhere, but, in this context.
Yep. Got it. Yeah, I love this question. This is definitely a huge passion of mine. Like I said, I love books and I love utilizing them in my interactions. And there are a ton of books on the market. And unfortunately, there are a ton that are not written developmentally appropriately that can actually do more harm than good. So there are definitely things that I look for when I'm looking for grief books, specifically. So some things that I look for, the first thing that is really high priority for me is I look for books that utilize clear, concrete language. So what do I mean by that? So I am looking for books that do not use euphemisms, like things that soften the death language. I know it can feel really harsh, but it's really important to have books that use the words, all the D words, died, death, dying. Those words can feel harsh as an adult, but they are clear for kids. They know what that means. And if they don't know what that means yet, you can say in a simple 1-2 liner what that does mean. And a good book will also define that too. So you don't even have to have the words. So I steer away from books that use words like passed away or gone or went to heaven when it's not described, when it's not backed up with clear, concise words of what that actually means. So those books can just add a lot of confusion and misconceptions, like their person is just going to come back, or their person is lost and we need to go find them. So,
like if you say, for example, we lost so-and-so last night. Right. In every context up till now, if you lose your shoe, you go and find your shoe.
Absolutely. Yeah. So concise language. And then some other things that I look for books that validate a large range of emotions. So, obviously there's going to be sadness with the grief experience, but there's so much more than just sadness. There's a whole mix of emotions that can come with it, and some emotions that are kind of conflicting. I mean, there are, certainly times of anger and joy and connection, and sometimes relief if it was something that was a really long-term type of, let's say it was an illness that was really long-term, and there were some painful things to that their parent was experiencing. So, and those things are confusing. So
Yeah.
I look for a book that validates a large range of emotions. I look for books that help to teach children how to move through and cope with this difficult experience. And not every book is going to check every single box, but when a book is able to capture as many of these boxes as possible, and some for me are non-negotiables, like that first one with avoiding euphemisms, and others are like, this is great that they have it. And there's not any one perfect book for every single situation too. So, and then another thing that I also look for is a book that is not too abstract, a book that isn't too lengthy, because both of those things, as a griever, whether you are a child or an adult, you only have so much brain capacity to process those things, because you're running on just a different brain than pre-loss. So I try to look for books that are both, a little bit on the shorter side and not very abstract, especially when we're talking about really young grievers, the 3 to 6 year olds. They don't process in that way anyways. So we want to find books that are really concrete and able to really explain what they're going through.
That makes sense. And you mentioned a few minutes ago, the importance of the D words, dead and death and dying. And you said if somebody doesn't know what that means, like you could use clear language. So what does that mean? Like their body stopped working? Like, can you tell, what is this clear language you're talking about?
Yeah. So keeping it simple, thinking about, what does that mean? Like you said, when somebody dies, that means that their heart stops beating, their breathing stops, they're not able to eat, drink, think, all the things that we do right now, they're not able to do. That's what it means to be dead. And anything that you are thinking about saying, just stop yourself for a second and think, does this have a double meaning? What would they think if they heard this before all of this? So,
and could it lead to confusion, therefore?
Yeah. Like sometimes people will equate it to being asleep forever. And then that can become associated with difficulties with sleep and fears with going to sleep. So making sure that you're not setting your child up for, fears or misconceptions moving forward. So yeah, keeping it as basic, simple, and concrete as possible, and not associating it with, other things like sleep.
That makes sense. Okay, because and just to kind of reiterate, I think you're saying you might confuse them and create a problem where now they themselves, this small child, is afraid to go to sleep at bedtime at 8 o'clock or whatever, because they're afraid that they might fall asleep and never wake up again.
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
gotcha. So this then is making me think. I've noticed that your Instagram has tons of resources. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes to your Instagram and really encourage people to follow you and check out the stuff you're posting. And some of it is in the category of books and some of it is in the category of tips. And there's probably other things too, but those are the two I have in mind at the moment. And I noticed a post recently, and the headline or whatever was very eye-catching. If you want to help your grieving child, stop doing this. Which, of course, then makes me think, what should I stop doing, right? So can you tell us what that point is about?
Sure. So that it was a reel that I had out there, and the stop doing this piece, what it was is stop telling white lies about if either about death or about questions that kids are asking when they're going through their grief situations. Like, I think one of the most common and scary questions that kids ask after the death of somebody in their family is, will you die too, or will I die? That's probably the biggest, scariest question that we get from grieving children. And as an adult, our gut reaction is, I got to protect this child. I got to do, I got to real quick, I got to say, no, everything's fine. Everybody's fine and move on. But what that's actually doing, yeah, it might save you a little bit of heartache in the moment, but it's actually setting them up for failure and distrust, because one day, if they don't already know, one day they'll realize everybody does die at some point. And yeah, that's a scary thing to think about. And they'll also think back, they were lying to me. They said everything was fine and everybody was going to be here forever. That's not true. And then that trust is compromised right there. So we're so much better off helping them understand that everybody dies one day, and it doesn't, what this is going to look like for each kid is going to be different. But helping them understand that all living things die. Most adults or most people live a very long life. Accidents can happen, illnesses can happen, but most of the time that's not the case. Most of the time people live a very long, healthy life. And, sometimes this brings up other difficult questions, like one question leads to another question, and we can follow the lead of the child and they can help us figure out, well, where do we need to go next? Or is this enough for them right now? We don't need to open up the floodgates and answer 500 questions that they didn't even ask, because obviously that can overwhelm them too. But really the whole point of that reel is just stop trying to protect and tell white lies or dance around the truth. Give them the answers to the questions that they are asking in honest, clear language, and we can give a little bit at a time and see where it goes next. And with that teaches those children that they can come to us with any topic. They can come to us with the really difficult stuff, and they know that they can trust us, and we are here for these difficult conversations. So it teaches them to keep coming back to ask these difficult conversations, and that they can trust us.
Okay, thank you for telling us about this, and because this is so important. And so I'm glad to hear, directly from a child life specialist who knows this stuff, right? You're talking about child life specialists. They know about developmental needs, developmental appropriateness, and how to work with kids. And this is really important. So I'm glad, because as when I was first getting in, when my husband was sick, for example, I was at that point, a regular parent with a job in IT, and I knew about, regular parenting things like, I don't know, potty training or sibling rivalry or homework wrangling or, whatnot. But these kind of questions, and everybody wants to protect their kid, right? The real question is, what does protect mean? What does that look like? And are you maybe misconstruing the idea of what protecting? And I think what you're saying is you're actually not protecting them by lying to them. In a long-term point of view, it's more protective for them to understand that they can come to you for the truth, that they can come to you with hard topics, that's actually going to set them up in the longer term better, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, you're better off in the long term by telling the truth and giving them those supports there too, and thinking through, well, what might they be wondering now too? A very common thing for a child to wonder about next after you tell them that all living things die is the question of, well, who takes care of me if you're not here? So that can proactively go in that 1-2 liner of you will always have somebody here to take care of you, or whatever you think they might be thinking about or worried about, proactively addressing those things too.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you for taking a few minutes to talk with us about that, because I think this is super important. And like I said, this is the kind of information that if somebody's following your Instagram, they can keep up on this stuff and I think learn some really important and helpful, tips isn't even the right word. It's kind of like a nugget of something you need to understand as a parent of a grieving kid. So I'm going to put the link again in the show notes to that. So tell us about your new book, The ABCs of Grief. I think it's coming out very soon. As we're recording this, they've been printed and they're on their way to you. So tell us about this book.
Yes. Yeah. So the ABCs of Grief is a book that walks through the alphabet and really one letter at a time unpacks the grief experience. So with this, it unpacks, what grief is, what grief feels like, what grief can look like over time, different layers of grief. It also dispels certain myths out there about grief that people have maybe heard at one point or another, or people have kind of projected onto the griever, whether it's the grieving child or the caregiver reading this book as well. I see this book as it's written for children, but I see this book as certainly being able to be utilized by adults as well. I know there are several children's books that I've utilized as a support group facilitator in adult groups where we kind of pick apart pieces of the book and have discussions about it. And I very much see that happening with this book as well. So yeah, I'm super, super excited about this book. I will have it in my hands the end of January. And currently I have pre-orders up on my website. So if anybody's listening to this, before, the end of January, they can get their pre-orders in. After January, they can find that either on my website or eventually it will be on Amazon as well. So several different places to get that resource, but very excited about what this book is going to do for families that are grieving.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I've seen a preview of it. I cannot wait to get you had a Kickstarter originally for this, and so my Kickstarter copy is in that batch that's coming on the boat, and hopefully we'll be getting to you soon so that you can get them out to all of us. I know people are very excited. You've had some terrific endorsements for it from some of the grief biggies, for lack of a better word. Yeah. Some of the people probably my listeners are familiar with. We've talked to a bunch of them here. So congratulations on that. That's terrific. Do you have and so it's ABC, so like A is for something, B is for something. Do you have an example or two of your favorite ones you might share with us?
Yeah. So I'll share A. A is for anything. And with every single letter, there's the letter and what it stands for. And then there's a sentence or two digging a little bit deeper about whatever the letter is. Okay. So with A is for anything, it really opens up the book beautifully because this grief book is not just for death. It's not just for bereavement. So this is for grief of any type. So like we talked about in the beginning, grief is not just death. It's all of the changes that kids can experience from a move, an illness, whatever that change looks like. So that is a great opener with the book. Then we have B is for bursts, which is one that I love because there are so many experiences for both children and adults where, they're just living their life and then they have a big trigger that comes on and it's a burst of these feelings, these memories, these emotions that just kind of knock their socks off. And I think that just really validates the whole experience of what grief really is and feels like. And for a child, it can be really jarring and unfamiliar. And what this book does is it gives language and helps them just articulates the experience. So they're like, oh, I'm not the only one. Oh, that's what that is. So my hope and my vision for this book is to just help give some validity and some language to these experiences that children are feeling.
Yeah, terrific. Okay. And I can imagine that it would be a vehicle for discussions too, right? Is like, you're on that page, A is for this, and there's some context or some additional information, and that could prompt a discussion. And I could also imagine that it's the kind of book you could pick up and you could read, 3 of them and put it back down. And then tomorrow you could start on D. And right, like if the kid doesn't want to maybe read the whole book at a time, there's probably a lot of different ways you could use it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
Yeah, absolutely. And then at the end of the book, I have a page that has a couple different activities that can be led directly from the book. So like you're saying with just picking up, a couple of letters, there's actually an activity at the end of the book that prompts you to pick a letter in the book and explore that with a therapeutic activity. There's an image, an illustration on one of the pages where there is a character that's peeling back an onion. And that can be such a great visual as well as a lead into an activity where you talk about all the different layers of your grief onion and all the different changes that you've experienced after the death of your mom, your dad, whoever it might be. So, that's leads into a lot of different therapeutic activities and emotional expression.
Good, terrific. Okay, well, I'll put the link to the page to pre-order on your website, and that's terrific. And before we finish up here, so you're an author, but as we said, you're a child life specialist and you're in private practice. So you work with families in the Baltimore area, and I think you also said virtually nationwide.
I do, yeah. And even internationally as well. I know sometimes I have a few Canadian clients as well, but yeah, most of my clients are actually virtual.
Okay.
I'd say probably 85% of my clients seek me virtually because there are a lot of gaps in services and a lot of people can't find the resources needed. So, open to, if anybody does need support, they can certainly reach out to me on my website. I'm sure you can have that in your show notes as well.
Absolutely.
But it's just kidsgriefsupport.com and in person in Baltimore County.
Okay, gotcha. I'll put the website, yes, on the show notes. And just to clarify, you work with kids of what age range?
Really from 2 all the way up to 18.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're talking teenagers as well, and preteens. Okay, all right. Sometimes I think when people talk about kids, it's hard to know what kids. Are you talking about little kids? Are you talking about like what kind of? So okay, that's good to clarify. Thank you.
And kids, big kids, young adults.
Yeah, that's terrific. Okay, and I think I saw somewhere you also will consult with parents, maybe either as a first step or even just as an only step if the kid doesn't want to come or something like that. You'll talk with parents as well.
Yeah, both. So I always do a caregiver consultation, parent consultation first. If I am working with their child, I need to have some baseline information before jumping into sessions.
Sure.
But also if there are some parents, caregivers that just want to talk through, these are the things that I'm seeing in my child. These are the things that I would like support with. I can come in as, we can do a parent consultation where I give them some of the tools. I'm there to help, be a support for them so they can help their child as well. So that's also an option if parents want to just have that additional support to help their kids at home.
That's really good to know. Thank you for telling us about that, because I do hear from people that are like, my kid is struggling with this or that, but they refuse to go to therapy. Or they refuse to go to grief group, or they refuse to whatever it is, right? And so it's good to know that it's not like, okay, well, now you're just stuck and you just got nothing, because at least the parent could potentially get some support in supporting their own child.
Yeah, absolutely, because we all grieve in different ways, and that includes kids too. They're not all children will thrive in a group setting. Not all children will thrive with the one-on-one. So we gotta work with what works for them.
Sure. Okay, great. All right. Well, this has been really great. Thank you for going through this with us today. And I'm excited about your book. And I always like to ask my guests at the end one question. If you could say one thing to widowed parents, what would it be?
So I think the one thing that I would really want widowed parents to know is that they are not alone in this experience. There are so many supports out there to help you navigate life after. And I know it can feel really overwhelming to find those supports at first. But there are other grieving widows out there. There are support systems to help your children through the experience. But I think, the underlying piece is you're not alone. There are lots of people and professionals that will walk alongside you through this whole experience and make sure that you have the supports in place so that you can pick up the pieces and figure out how they go together in a way that works for you moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Okay, well, I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Jessica Correnti, who's a certified child life specialist and a children's book author for grieving children. Jessica, where can listeners find you if they'd like to learn more about your work?
So I guess there are two great places to find me. One would be my Instagram page, which is Kids Grief Support on there. And then the other place is my website, kidsgriefsupport.com. So either one of those places is a great place to start to reach out.
Great. Okay, we'll put both of those in the show notes. And this has been so great. Thank you, Jessica, for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Jessica Correnti as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 148. And if you're finding the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful, please consider supporting the show. It's easy. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. That's buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. As always, thank you for listening. And until next week, remember, you've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.